The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis is a rich, character-driven narrative that explores the groundbreaking collaboration between two Israeli psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose work reshaped our understanding of human decision-making. Lewis, known for turning complex subjects into gripping stories, doesn't just recount their academic accomplishments, he immerses readers in the emotional and intellectual bond that fueled a revolution in psychology, economics, and even medicine. At its heart, the book is about how two minds came together to challenge the prevailing idea that humans are rational agents who make decisions in their best interest. The story begins not with a textbook or a lecture hall, but with a human question: why do people make bad decisions? From this deceptively simple inquiry, Kahneman and Tversky unearthed the deep, unconscious biases that influence judgment. They weren't just pointing out that people make mistakes. They were mapping the cognitive shortcuts, heuristics, that systematically lead us astray. Lewis frames their discoveries as both scientific milestones and acts of intellectual intimacy, rooted in a rare friendship that allowed each man to reach further than he could have alone. Kahneman, introspective, self-doubting, and haunted by his experiences as a Holocaust survivor, brought a deep sensitivity to the psychological cost of error. Tversky, on the other hand, was dazzlingly confident, razor-sharp, and unapologetically curious. Their intellectual chemistry was electric, and Lewis captures the magic of their partnership with the intimacy of a novelist. They could finish each other's thoughts, challenge each other's theories, and laugh at the absurdities of the human mind in ways that no one else could understand. Their work began by dismantling the idea of the rational actor, the cornerstone of classical economics. Instead of people carefully weighing outcomes and maximizing utility, they found that people rely on mental shortcuts, like anchoring, availability, and representativeness, that often mislead. For example, when asked to estimate something like the percentage of African countries in the UN, people's guesses could be manipulated simply by spinning a wheel with random numbers. This was not just trivia, it was a doorway into understanding how fragile our confidence in judgment really is. Lewis brings these theories to life not as abstract concepts, but through vivid, often personal stories. He recounts how doctors, military officers, and even NBA teams made costly errors by relying on intuition over analysis. A particularly memorable example is from the world of medicine, a doctor diagnosing intestinal diseases by feel, convinced of his own instincts, yet frequently wrong. These moments connect Kahneman and Tversky's theories to real consequences, reminding us that poor judgment is not just a psychological quirk, it can be deadly. What made their collaboration so powerful was not just what they studied, but how they studied it. They avoided the lab in favor of thought experiments and deeply human scenarios. They were fascinated by ordinary people making everyday choices, whether to buy insurance, whether to trust a hunch, whether to ignore data. And their approach was deeply democratic. They weren't interested in superhuman rationality, but in making sense of the frailties that unite us all. As their reputation grew, the academic world began to take notice. Their papers, once read by a handful of curious psychologists, started reaching economists, policymakers, and eventually the Nobel Prize Committee. Lewis traces how their influence expanded beyond psychology into behavioral economics, culminating decades later in Kahneman receiving the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. Tversky had passed away by then, and the Nobel is not awarded posthumously. But the brilliance of the Undoing Project lies in how it tells this intellectual story through a deeply emotional lens. The friendship between Kahneman and Tversky was not without friction. Their differing temperaments, the growing imbalance in recognition, and the strain of international fame began to erode what was once an unbreakable bond. Lewis writes with empathy and nuance about this unraveling, presenting it not as drama for drama's sake, but as a natural, painful consequence of two extraordinary minds trying to navigate the real world. One of the most poignant threads in the book is the contrast between their world-shaping ideas and their human limitations. Kahneman's insecurity, which had once been soothed by Tversky's confidence, became a source of tension. Tversky's brashness, once charming, became isolating. Their undoing, as the title suggests, was not just about the irrational mind. It was also the unraveling of a rare intellectual union that had reshaped how we understand ourselves. Lewis does not shy away from the complexity of their legacy. He explores how their work laid the foundation for the burgeoning field of behavioral economics, which influenced everything from retirement plan design to government policy. Yet he also reflects on the dangers of misapplying their insights, how understanding bias can sometimes lead to overconfidence in nudging people, or assuming we can fix irrationality without understanding context. As the narrative draws to a close, Lewis reflects on the enduring power of their ideas. Their work remains a cornerstone for anyone who wants to understand why people do what they do, from Wall Street to emergency rooms. But beyond the theory, what lingers is the beauty of their partnership, the way they created something greater than either could alone. Their intellectual intimacy was a form of love, and like all love stories, it ended with a sense of loss. Yet the emotional gravity of that ending doesn't overshadow their triumph. In fact, it gives it depth. By showing us their humanity, their vulnerability, their ego, their grief, Lewis makes their accomplishments feel all the more miraculous. These weren't detached geniuses dissecting the human mind from afar. They were living it, wrestling with it, trying to illuminate it from within. The Undoing Project is, ultimately, a meditation on both the power and the limits of the mind. It reminds us that thinking is not always rational, but it is always human. Through Kahneman and Tversky's story, Lewis invites us to be curious about our own minds, not to fear our flaws, but to understand them. And perhaps, in doing so, to forgive ourselves and others a little more readily. It is not a self-help book in the traditional sense, but it offers deeply practical wisdom. By understanding how our judgments are shaped, not by logic, but by emotion, bias, and context, we can begin to make decisions with more humility and care. Whether you're a policymaker, a teacher, a doctor, or simply someone who's ever regretted a choice, the Undoing Project offers a lens through which the world makes a little more sense. In the end, Lewis doesn't just tell us how we think, he shows us how two men thought, together, in a way that changed everything. It's a story of minds meeting, diverging, and leaving behind a legacy that continues to ripple through how we understand decision-making, risk, and the fragile, brilliant machinery of human thought.